Thanks for joining us for another episode of Battle for the Belt. Today we're at the Northwest Ag Research Station up in Wood County, and I was able to drag a Spartan from up north. So with me today is Dr. Manni Singh, and he is my counterpart at Michigan State University. So Manni, you've done quite a bit of planting date research in Michigan on both corn and soybean.
Yep.
What have you found so far?
Yeah, so again, I think it's been like 5-6 years since we have been doing this work and pretty much on both crops, right? And to me, I think there's a lot we can talk on this topic, but I think the bottom line is that soybean plant, doesn't seem to mind as much those non-ideal cool and wet soil conditions that are typical early in the growing season, right? So even though the stand might not look as ideal, but it seemed to get through it and still be able to give a yield, a decent yield, right? So there is again a potential for yield improvement by planting soybeans early, but we have not seen a yield penalty when we plant soybeans, in non-ideal conditions. Unless, it can happen, but the chance of that is, I believe, is lower compared to what we have seen on the corn side, where if you plant corn in these non-ideal conditions, we have seen yield penalty. And we are talking for East Lansing, central Michigan. We typically start planting around April 25th or so. That sort of relates to our crop insurance dates as well. And we have seen yield penalty when we push corn to those early plantings. And we have not seen that so much on the soybean side. I don't know how that relates to your experience, but I think that's pretty much the bottom line.
Yeah, and that's, I think, what we see here in Ohio. One of our trials last year had not ideal growing conditions early on, and soybeans were fine, where corn didn't do as well. We actually had our best corn planting date in Western Ohio last year in June.
Ooh.
Which is not normal, but it was really wet, and then it was really, really dry. The corn root did not develop well, and then we had some wind and they lodged.
Yeah.
So some interesting growing conditions. But what I'm hearing you say is that corn is kind of wimpy.
Ooh. I don't know if I would use that word, but yeah, I think in corn, it does matter that consistent emergence, consistent plant to plant, phenological stages, everything needs to be at V1, and the plant does seem to care. And there's a reason behind that, right? Corn plant does not tiller. And it does not, for the most part, produce multiple ears on a plant. You do see that sometime, but the genetics we have doesn't really provide that, sort of flexibility, so to speak. While a soybean plant, even if you have, some spots out there, empty spots, the plant is going to be able to branch out, right, and be able to compensate. So there's more plasticity, so to speak, in terms of how soybean plant behaves compared to a corn plant. And I think that goes back to, again, developing this ideal uniform stand, which seems to be more important for corn than beans. And if you push for early planting, that's where I think you can get in trouble. Right?
Sure. So maybe corn's not wimpy, but soybeans are very resilient.
Yeah, so I would agree with that. Yeah, soybean plants has that resiliency, plasticity, whatever you want to call it. Again, you have to be careful, right? Still not going into very non-ideal conditions, And I think the rule of thumbs we have been using, right, probably are not as accurate anymore. We used to have a 50-degree soil temperature and a favorable forecast. We have planted below 50 and been okay with that. I think for beans, it's probably in mid-40s, so somewhere like that. But you don't want to be planting into wet soils because then you create compaction, and you can have an issue on developing roots for the given year and long-term consequences there, right? So we still need to be careful, but I think if you're ready to plant, and to me, I think I recommend people don't go by the crop, go by the field. If the field is ready, you go and you plant that field. And a lot of times, we know what fields are good candidates for early planting, right? Based on your soil texture, based on drainage, tillage conditions, residue. So targeting those fields for early planting, I think, is a good starting point. And then within that, soybean plant seems to be more forgiving than a corn plant, right?
So Manni, I know you've done some work on planting date and soybean relative maturity. Can you talk about some of your results? So if we plant early, what kind of relative maturity would you recommend for soybean?
So I'll start by talking numbers that are relevant to Michigan, right? So Lansing area, mid Michigan, we have done a lot of work, both actually on soybean and on corn side. We have now multiple projects with data on this. Do we need to change our maturity based on the planting time? And there's other factors we have looked into as well, right? So on the soybean side, our typical maturity group in Lansing area is about 2.5. And we have seen when we are pushing for those end of April plantings, we can get an extra yield benefit by pushing to a little bit of a longer bean. So what we call late maturing varieties, and we have gone up to 3.0 and even 3.5. So maybe zero point 0.5 up to a maturity group longer than what you typically use in your normal planting window, right? And that's where we have seen the yield benefit. And we have reasons to believe that it's very consistent. We go and do yield components. We have counted number of beans. We have looked at phenology. So typically what happens is with these late maturing varieties, you get a longer reproductive phase. You're putting on more number of nodes, by planting early, and then using these late maturing varieties, you are able to fill them for a longer time. Because typically what happens if you increase your number of seeds, your weight goes down and you don't gain anything, right? And that has happened to us in some early planting scenarios. You don't get a yield penalty, but you don't get a yield benefit. But by going to these late maturing varieties, you do push that up. And we have seen consistent benefit without going too far, right? I would not go beyond a maturity group longer than what's common in your area. So we have consistently seen benefits of going with that approach. And we have some data actually to show similar things on the corn side as well, that when we are planting corn early in the season, about 100 relative maturity is typical for our area in Lansing, and we have pushed it up to 107 or 108. So about it 5 to 10 relative maturity units longer, something similar to beans. We have seen benefits there.
Sure. So taking advantage of a longer growing
Yep.
season.
Yep.
So
Yep.
one final question, Manny, and I know you work on both corn and soybean. Are you team corn or team soybean?
I knew this was coming, huh? To me, again, I work on both crops, right? I don't think I will put myself in one or the other bucket. I think to me, both corn and soybean are the kings, and I think that's where I will leave it.
All right. So Manny is crop neutral. So
Yeah.
we appreciate your
Yeah.
time today.
Sure, yeah. I'm a cropping systems person, right? So to me, all crops matter, right? So, all right. Thanks
All
for
right,
having
thanks
me.
a lot.
I loved it. It's been hot today, but it's been a fun day.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Thanks.